Welcome, everybody, to Watch More Movies. This is the podcast where me and my brother Devon watch movies that at least one of us has never seen before. Every month we do a new theme, and this month we are doing the theme of found footage movies. We've already talked about Butterfly Kisses, and then last week Unfriended. So you can go check out those episodes if you haven't. Excuse me. This week we are talking about The Bay, a film by Barry Levinson. This is a movie that I had heard good things about, so I'll jump a little bit into it as to why I chose this movie, because this was a recommendation from me, although I hadn't seen the movie or knew anything about what it was about going into it. Devin, did you know anything about The Bay? Had you seen it before, or anything along those lines when I had brought it up for this month?
0%. I had no idea.
All right, cool. So I'm excited to see what you thought about it. If this is your first time listening or watching to the podcast, a couple of things. So we talk about the movie spoiler-free, and we give our review, and then we give a rating out of 10 and whether or not we would recommend the film, and then we jump into spoiler discussion. So if you haven't watched The Bay, you can still listen to this first part, no spoilers, and then we will warn you before we get to that point in the podcast so you can watch the film and then come back to finish it. With The Bay, I heard about it because there's a YouTuber called Ryan Hollinger that I am subscribed to on YouTube. Great YouTuber. And he posted a video a long time ago, a number of years ago, about The Bay. And the title in his YouTube video was something along the lines of, like, my favorite found footage horror movie, or something along those lines. So I started watching the video, but unfortunately, in most of his YouTube videos, he talks about spoilers. So when I went to go watch his video, he was like, spoilers for this film, if you haven't seen it. I stopped watching his video, because, I mean, just by him saying that's his favorite one, I was like, okay, I definitely want to watch this. So I didn't watch the YouTube video. But then, just like everything else in my life, I forgot about it about 10 minutes afterwards. So I never watched the movie. And then years later, we're doing this podcast. We're talking about found footage. I'm looking up found footage movies, and I see The Bay. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to watch. So that is why I chose this one. On Rotten Tomatoes, it does have a 76% certified fresh rating. It also has a 43% from the audience score, so a little bit lower there. And the critics' consensus is that Barry Levinson's eco-horror flick cleverly utilizes familiar found footage methods in service of a gruesome yet atmospheric chiller. I know that The Bay is available on HBO Max. That's where I watched it. You might be able to find it elsewhere as well. But I've been kind of dancing around it, but I mean, I'll come out and say it at this point. I did really enjoy The Bay. What about you, Devin? What did you think about it?
I did enjoy it. I wasn't too surprised by it or taken back, but I did like a lot of the things that they did with this movie. I just wasn't really too impressed with it.
Now, The Bay, the actual plot of the movie, again, we're not going to spoil anything, but essentially you have footage that was... it's found footage because it's a collection of news report footage, police footage, civilian footage that was all confiscated by the U.S. government, supposedly, obviously in the story of this movie. And an anonymous source leaked the footage for everyone, on the internet to watch. And then a news reporter, who's actually the main star of the film, she, once this footage is leaked, puts together this documentary, I guess you would say, about the events of the, of The Bay. Her name is Kristen Connelly, is the actor. Or I'm sorry. I will look up the actress here. I think I have the wrong list in front of me. But essentially, this is a news reporter. I think it's her first news report, she says, in the movie as a reporter. And she is there in this town, which is a small town on a bay. That's why it's called The Bay. And she is reporting on a 4th of July ceremony that this town has every year. So everyone in the town is out, at this festival. There's all of these good, just like your typical city fair that you would have during the summer. And while reporting on this, it's supposed to just be like this fluff piece, nothing too serious. All of a sudden, people just start dying and crazy things start happening. So that's essentially the plot of the movie. Um, as far as what you did enjoy about it, Devin, the things that you did like about it, what was it?
Well, first I want to say I think the lead role, the newscaster, was Nancy Aluka. Um, I believe that's the star of the film. Um, I could be wrong as
Yeah,
well,
I'm trying
but
to look into it. It's a little bit unclear for some reason, but I'm looking into it.
as far as what I did like, the main character, she's a news reporter and she's kind of covering, you know, this. She's at this fair or whatever that she's covering, and I feel like with her being really pretty much the only face that's constantly on the screen, she did a pretty good job at. She didn't have to do too much. There wasn't a lot of obstacles that she had to, act around and everything. So I feel like she did a fine job. As far as one thing I think this film did lack is a lack of like just characters. You have like the mayor, but besides that, you just have like a couple of other characters that are kind of like talked about or are kind of there, but they're not really. You barely given an identity for any of these people, and that's one thing. This newscaster being the main character, she's not really trying to do anything besides cover what's going on with her. I believe she has like one cameraman following her, with this like with who's working for the news station, and but she's not really trying to do anything besides capture what's going on in the events of the day, and that's the one thing that kind of um, I couldn't get too invested in because although what was going on was pretty interesting, it was kind of like it was giving you backstory of what was going on, and then you were just kind of following this news anchor or newscaster woman just kind of running around the place and trying to capture what's going on. It's basically the movie.
Okay, and the actress's name is Kether Donahue. She plays Donna. That is the reporter in the movie. Um, there's also the only really other actress that like I knew from the movie was Kristen Connelly. That's why I was confused at first. But she plays another character named Stephanie. She's actually from The Cabin in the Woods, one of my favorite horror movies. So that's where I knew her from. She's also in the film. Um, there's something about the Bay that, the story itself that we'll get to obviously in the spoilers, really just kind of like struck a chord with me from like the creepiness of it. And I don't want to necessarily say the realism of it because I feel like they take a lot of liberties with how possible it is. From what I've looked into, it's not really possible, at least in the way that they describe it. But with that being said, watching the movie, they presents it in a way that seems very possible. And it's something, when it comes to just like the environment and how, political officials and companies and things like that treat, our air, water, all those things, it wouldn't be super surprising for something really bad to happen unintentionally because of something that a company did. And off the top of my head, one movie that I saw recently that actually was based off a true story, Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo, where he plays a lawyer basically looking into what a really big company, did that messed up a lot of people physically. And that's a really good movie. I would say it's better than this one for sure, but it's more of a drama. But in that same vein, this, while being a fictitious horror film, is in that same kind of scenario of an unintended consequence of ignorance by humans and thinking that we can do whatever we want to our planet and there's not going to be consequences. So that was the biggest thing, from a thematic standpoint, I really enjoyed. But would you agree with me on that, or did that kind of stick with you at all?
Yeah, the basically what you know the main antagonist you can say of this film, um, which I guess you could say there are a couple, but the main scary horror aspect of the film is what really intrigued me. which I did watch the trailer before watching the movie just to get a sense of what was going to be going on. And even the trailer tries to portray itself as if this is like a news story that's happening, which I thought was pretty cool. But as far as that, like, yeah, that would, if anything like that happened, um, that would be like, crazy scary. I would, and just put it trying to, with the found footage, like POV, aspect of it, like, kind of puts you in that situation, and that is pretty terrifying. But like you said, with, is how possible is this situation, slim to none, but with those types of things, like we've like just the last movie we reviewed, Unfriended, is like, how likely is that situation to happen? That's probably less,
Yeah,
that just automatically off the
yeah.
bat is less likely of a situation to happen than this.
Fair
So
enough.
when you get something that's like, yeah, when you get something that's like, this could be real and it portrays itself as real and everything, it just that, creeps you out. And it's not like I'm gonna turn off the lights and think about this scary thing that's happening in the movie, but next time I go somewhere, I might be like, it might click in my head or something, and it's just like, one of those things that kind of creeps you out, gives you the chills.
Yeah, a lot. Like I said, I think with the science, they do whatever they want. As far as portraying it as something that could happen when in reality it's really not. And we'll get into that more later. But I think because they use so many things that are real, like, the thing that's the antagonist in this film is a real thing that exists, right? They didn't make up something. The things that cause it are real things that happen in the real world, economically and in the environment. So even though it's not like we don't have proof or evidence that those actions that we take can lead to this, that's the jump, right? Like, that's the fictitious jump. But it's just a very interesting and a very scary what if scenario. What if what we do did cause this? Because in theory, there's nothing we could do about it. You know what I mean? Like, if this happened, there's really nothing we can do, like, so that it is pretty scary in that regard. Beyond that, I thought the performances were pretty good. Catherine Donahue as Donna, I thought, did a serviceable job. There were times where, it wasn't the best. The film is very, very low budget. I'm going to try to find what the budget was on this, actually. $2 million, so very low budget movie. And you can feel it at times. But it works with it being found footage because it really commits to being found footage. Like, every shot of this movie is either the news report footage, police dash cam footage, footage from the CDC, footage from civilians filming from their cell phone. Like, it very much commits to that in a way that makes it feel even more realistic. But beyond that,
Yeah, that's another thing. It takes so many different angles. It's like anytime they could think of, like, can we use a different form of POV, they do it. Like surveillance cameras, they have that, or like, people actually documenting something happening, they use that. So that's another thing I really liked about it.
yeah, it's very, very well done in that respect. But yeah, it's a low budget trick, but it works because they do it well. So while sometimes you can feel the low budget, there's certain special effects that don't necessarily look the best, but then at other times there's practical shots used and practical, like, props that look very good. So I kind of go back and forth on that part of it. As far as the story, I've already kind of talked about it, but I really enjoyed it. And there's also just this, the film sets up a great overwhelming sense of dread. The way that the film opens, like something bad's gonna happen, and it does this thing where, with the footage that it uses, once you know what's happening and once you know what's about to happen, it shows footage of these people at this 4th of July celebration having a good time, but you're filled with dread because you know what's about to happen, or at least you have an inkling of what's about to happen. So throughout the whole film, it shows you these happy moments or these things that typically would be, positive, and you can't help but just feel dread. So that was, not that that's an enjoyable emotion, but that's what they were going for, and it succeeded. And I just felt tense the entire movie, because
And I think another reason another reason for that, I just wanted to quickly point out, and without giving too much away, is that like not only is like you know what's like there's a certain point where you know what's going to happen very soon, but I really don't want to give anything away, but it's like what is going to happen has already happened, and now you just
Yeah.
have to wait for things to play out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing. It's like when you have something like a meteor's coming to Earth, nothing's happened yet. You're waiting for something to happen. But when something like what this movie has, something's already happened and people are sitting there having a good time, there's no turning back. There's
Yep.
nothing you can do about it of what's going to come, and that's just like another layer of that dread.
Yeah, because you can stop a meteor, right? In theory, I mean, in theory, but it would almost be if this was instead a meteor just hit on the other side of the world, and you know that damage is coming, and these people are sitting here unaware. That's almost like that's what it's like. It's already happened. There's no blowing up the meteorite. Like the meteor is hit Earth.
Yeah.
So great. That's a great description. Beyond that, there's really not much I can praise or complain about without getting into spoilers, so I guess I'll just leave it at that. I'll let you do your rating first, if there was anything else you wanted to bring up before.
Yeah, just one last thing I wanted to bring up is try to explain my score the best way possible without spoilers. Is last week I gave my review on Unfriended, and I said one of the main things was that it a lot of times it didn't use their one tool that they had to you know that it was a horror movie. It was rated R. They could do whatever they want, and I just feel like they didn't execute on that as much as they should have or even could have. But with this movie, I feel like it is rated R. They did do a lot with it. Although I would have liked to see the main character kind of deal with more situations because we're kind of following her as much as we are just following like the story unfolding. Um, so there's a positive and negative. I did like the fact that they went the limits and really made it as graphic as they could and just as dreadful as they could. But on the negative side, I would have liked to actually follow a character, you know, kind of deal with these things and have some climax with the main character in the story. But with that said, we'll get into more in spoilers, but I'm gonna give this movie a 4 out of 10. And I do want to say one thing really quick. It is hard. I do almost want to give it a 5 because I do really enjoy this movie. I don't think I would give it a recommendation unless I was having a conversation with someone or some people and we were talking about a very specific form of these POV movies or something, and I'm like, like subgenre of POV movies, and I'm like, that's probably one of the best movies I've seen of this subgenre of POV. So but like, I'm not gonna recommend the movie and be like, this is a great movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I fall a lot in that same boat, although I think that I enjoyed the movie more. When I first watched the film and I got done watching it, I did enjoy it, but I didn't really, I just thought, I was like, okay, that was pretty good, probably like a 6 out of 10, 6 out of 10. It was fine. It was pretty good. But something about it, I don't know if it was those themes that we talked about or if it's the actual, plot itself that we'll get into about what is attacking this town or, what exactly creeped me out so much. But in the following days after watching it, I kept thinking about the movie. I don't know exactly why, but it really stuck with me. And it's rare that a movie has staying power like that in my mind because I watch so many movies that it's kind of just like, okay, on to the next one, So, if I see a movie that's excellent, that 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 in my opinion, yeah, it'll stick with me. But for a movie to just be okay, but to really stick with me, there must be something in it that was really done well. So that kind of made me want to raise the score. However, now that it's settled a little bit with me, I don't really see myself watching the movie again, and I would agree that I'm not going to recommend this movie like openly without having a focused discussion on, the found footage genre or, anything along those lines, or maybe something that's like, a movie from a while ago that was kind of underrated, something along those lines, because it's such a unique, weird movie that I'm not just going to recommend it to anybody. But with that being said, I don't want to give it too low of a score just based on that, because I did really enjoy it. So I'm a little bit in a pickle with this one. I think currently I am going to settle with a 6 out of 10, because it's a movie that I would, based on its quality alone, I would recommend it. Like, is this movie good enough to be recommended? Yes. So I would give it a 6 out of 10. However, I'm not going to recommend it to everyone. It would have to be a pretty specific, movie that someone's looking to watch. Do you want to watch a found footage horror that's about environmental consequences of a corrupt government, but also has to do with like some stuff that might really gross you out and is very graphic? Like, it's very, interesting.
Or even someone says, I want to watch a low budget POV film that doesn't necessarily scare me, but just gives me the creeps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not scary. Kind of like you said, you're not going to turn off your lights and be scared. Maybe someone would, but not typically. It's more so like it might make you scared doing everyday activities, but we'll get into it more in spoilers, which we're about to get into. So, Devon, I know you gave it a 4 out of 10, but you did say you might recommend it to somebody. I would recommend it if you're looking for a found footage horror. It's pretty good, but it just, it might gross you out depending on the content and what makes you squeamish. It is a graphic movie, so I would just give those few warnings. But based on the quality of the film, I would say it's recommendable, and I give it a 6 out of 10. So we're going to jump into spoilers now. If you've already seen The Bay, or if you haven't seen it and you're not going to watch it and don't care, you can continue on with the rest of the episode. So let's just jump into it. I always think it's funny when people say, like, okay, we're going to jump into the spoiler part now, so we assume everyone's watched this, but then they go on to describe the plot of the movie as if, like, they assume people haven't. So we don't really do that on this podcast, but I do just want to preface a little bit, just for our sake, so, to kind of set a baseline of what we're talking about, because we've really been avoiding the main part of this movie. So the movie is about a parasite, a real-life creature called a Simotha exua, or something along those lines. Very hard to say. A real creature that, in real life, is a parasite for fish, and it enters them through their gills, and it cuts off the blood circulation to their tongue, and once their tongue falls off, the parasite basically becomes their tongue, which is just already gross to think about. So then this movie makes the jump of, this mayor in this town is dumping all of this shit, meaning literal shit from chickens, but also just trash and everything else into their lake, into their bay, that it basically acts as steroids and mutates these isopods into something that now are a parasite for humans, and not only just a parasite for humans, but are ones that get inside of you and eat your organs from the inside out. So they don't just get into you and become your tongue like they do for a fish. They literally eat you from the inside out. That's the big scientific jump, right? Like, we have no evidence that these creatures in real life would ever be harmful to humans. They are not. They can't be a parasite to us. From what I understand and what I've looked into, you could literally swallow one of these things and it's just going to die inside of you. Now, I would not recommend that, but that's just what my understanding of it. So that's the scientific jump. But that's what I was talking about as far as who's to say that couldn't happen? Not maybe with this particular species, but anything that's out in the water. We do pollute our water so much. Or maybe what happens if we fucking start to pollute birds with all the pollutants we put in the air? It's really a scary thing that you don't really think about from an animal perspective, because typically when people talk about the environment and pollution, they're talking about, the weather, climate change, the overall state of the health of our planet. What about individual animals that already live here that are affected by this? I had never thought about that before, so that really is what got me about the movie.
Yeah, like the 20 million other species on this planet.
Yeah, that have no say in what we're doing. What happens if one day one of them just gets fucked up by it and it's something we can't control? Obviously, if it's a bear or something, you can shoot and kill the bear. But these are small things you can't even see. in the movie they even make the point of like, oh, if there are these isopods that are in the water and can kill you, like it does to those divers in the movie and to some people who jump in the water, like how are those getting into the filtrated water supply? And they're like, oh, well, what about their larvae that are so small you can't even see, and then they get into the water and then they grow once they're in your body? That's where it really got me like, yeah, there's nothing anybody can do about it. They're all screwed.
Yeah, and I have actually seen a couple videos on how like tap water is purified and stuff. And although it's it's state of the art, it's nothing magical or heavenly about it.
And
But I think
this does take place specifically in a small rural town. You would assume they don't have the state of the art filtration that even we would have in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, and I want to say that I feel like one of the bigger leaps that they take with this, as far as like scientifically, that even someone who doesn't know much about science, which I feel like they do in a lot of science fiction movies, is the whole evolution basis, like basis on like any type of creature. This creature starts off, it was just a larva or something, and this pollution from the fecal matter from the chickens and the trash and all that stuff, like it was basically steroids and stuff. But even that doesn't necessarily, I don't know if it was actually said in the movie. I feel like it was, because it's usually one of those things that they try to grab you with, but it's like it pushed their evolution 5 million years, and it's like, okay, that's never gonna happen. Like you literally have to have like some godly gene to put into something to make it evolve, and like especially, and and it does, it is kind of like just one of those science fiction things, just like aliens or something, where it's like that's that's unthinkable, but this is a science fiction movie, like that's what it's all about. This isopod or whatever could evolve in less than 24 hours to be this crazy monstrous thing, which is obviously scary.
Yeah, and I think it's really the scariest part is what we talked about earlier, is the fact that it's already happened. Like you said, the water's already contaminated. The isopods and their larvae are already in the water, and for the most part, most of the people in the town have already consumed them. Going into the movie, so it's kind of just like you more so get to the point of, can anyone survive? And really, the only survivor is the news reporter who makes it out alive. But even like her cameraman dies, even though I don't think we get to see his death on screen, but the camera, everyone basically in the movie dies. And I think one of the more chilling parts of the movie for me was the husband and wife and their baby that come to the town. I think it's to meet up with her parents, they say, and they go there on a boat, and her husband gets infected by the parasite on their way there, and they come to the town at nighttime when everything has already gone down. So like they get to the town and it looks like a deserted apocalypse, and they have no idea what's going on. And that part was very creepy to me. And then obviously the husband ends up dying, and apparently she makes it out with her baby, but it's never really explained, I guess. A lot of the ending of the movie was the weakest part for me, because a lot of the stories weren't really wrapped up. The CDC is kind of just like, hey, we should probably do something about this, and the government's like, no, we're basically just going to chalk this up as an L. Like we're not going to tell anyone about this and move on.
I think they were just like, no, we're just going to like nuke it and move on. Like no one has relatives in this town. Like,
yeah. Well, it does mention that like there was a settlement or something for relatives, and basically they were saying like, look, this lake is the CDC was saying like, this lake isn't closed off, like this goes into the ocean, and they're like, okay. And I think they even said in the movie, the government official was like, okay, what do you want us to do, close down the whole coast? And it's like, yeah, good point. It's like, what do you do? So really their only option is to just not talk about it and just let this town of people die, and then hopefully nothing else happens. So it's kind of scary when you think about it, but it's true. It's like, look, we're not going to shut down all of California or whatever because this one thing happened in this small town. It just kind of creeps me out even thinking about it. Like, who knows if any, something like
Yeah.
this could happen in a small town and we would never hear about it.
Yeah, and that's another thing that always gets on my nerves. Not about like movies that do this or anything. I'm talking about like real life, which obviously, how much of this could you take for like reality and stuff. But like when they have something like the CDC in there and stuff, and it's like it's always they're just like we don't want to cause mass hysteria. We don't want to cause any sort of a scene that can be taken across the country or to other continents and stuff. We just want to keep it low key as possible. But like, and it's like we've seen in our lifetimes and in our history books or whatever, we've seen somewhat some proof of all this stuff where they do try to keep some stuff secret and keep some mass hysteria down and everything. But like, you know, I don't really know. Like, I guess like if I was in charge, I wouldn't try to cause mass hysteria, but like if something like this is going down, it's like, look, I'm gonna deal with it. I'm not just gonna like, you know, let a bunch of people die or like, not shut off the coast because I'm gonna freak a bunch of people out. I'm gonna deal with the situation at hand so it doesn't get any worse. Like and it doesn't really get into like what the consequences after that could have been or whatever, but because there is evaporation, clouds move, whatever, but but that's always just something that like pisses me off. Just like thinking like the CDC is really doing this, like, and you guys better be like, they're just sitting up there like, yeah, we're just gonna let these people die. Like do your job, do something.
Yeah.
Like they're always just not doing anything.
Yeah, that was a very interesting element of the film for me, and that's why I was glad that the movie didn't just stay with this news reporter. It wasn't just the news footage or just the footage from that guy's camera. It literally goes all across the board, the scenes where it would cut to the one guy from the CDC trying to figure out, he's working with the surgeon at the local hospital, trying to figure out what the hell is happening. Because when he first calls in, they think it's just like a disease. They think it's just like a sickness people are having. Then they find out there's a creature. Then they, they start to find out that what this creature is. That was some of my favorite scenes in the movie, because as the viewer, I was also finding out what was going on. But then also one thing I wanted to say is, thank God this was not a zombie movie. I had no inclination to think it was a zombie movie, but there was a few scenes towards the beginning after people start getting sick and dying that it just gave me the vibe of these people are gonna like have a sickness and then come back to life and start eating people. Like it brushed up against that line, and maybe it was because we did 2 months of zombie movies, I don't know, but I was just like, if this ends up being a zombie movie, I'm gonna be so disappointed. And it wasn't, and it ends up being a movie about a parasite, something that I've never seen a found footage or a horror movie about. So that also was a really nice surprise. I'm glad that wasn't the case. I would say the closest it gets to being the zombie movie is when the 2 cops go into the house full of like infected people, and the one cop is infected and he's like, no, don't come in here, and then the other cop gets infected. So then when the mayor shows up, the cop comes out like all messed up, and then he shoots the like the sheriff and then shoots himself. It's like that was like the closest to kind of reminding me of a zombie movie where he's like, don't do this to yourself, don't get infected. But really the way they portrayed the pain too that the people were going through really made it serious. Like it made you realize like this isn't just something that gets in you and kills you and whatever. Like it's very painful to think that all of the people in this town that died went through it. Like the husband, for example, with the couple that comes later on in the night, he goes from being perfectly fine to they're there at night and he's like begging his wife to kill him so that he doesn't have to go through this pain. That really kind of struck a nerve with me. It's hard to get across in film sometimes, pain, you know what I mean, like because you can't feel it watching the movie, so it's hard to describe that. I thought this movie did a good job.
Yeah, and I did want to touch on that with the cops who like go into the house and it's just the dash cam footage from like the police car of the outside of the house, and you have no idea what it looks like in there. Like you can't see through a window, all the blinds are shut and everything, but you just hear, because they have like the comms on or whatever, and you just hear the cop go in there, and you just hear like 1 or 2 people in the house just making guttural noises and like screaming and crying, just literally like crying for help or anything, and then I'm pretty sure you hear one of like the infected people say like shoot me or kill me, like kill me please, and the cop for a second is just like, he's in shock and he doesn't know what to do, and he's like, oh, this is messed up, and then he ends up shooting them and walking out or whatever. But I did want to say that was probably my like favorite scene, like theatrical scene of the movie. And I also do want to point to one more of those scenes that, not that I really cared for it that much, but like one of the first kind of glimpses you get to see of how graphic it is, and it's when like the older lady is just like walking aimlessly through the through the fair with, she's like looks like the only infected person. She's got like the uh, I forget what you call it, but like swells and all that stuff all over her face and her body and her arms and stuff, and she's like just like crying out for help and everything and walking through, and everyone's like, what the fuck's wrong with her? And she's just like in this immense pain. So they did a very, very good job at that. But also another thing I wanted to say was the practical effects that they used in this film. And I'm sure there was some CIG or CGI in there, but again, it was a pretty low budget. But I want to say one of my favorite practical effects that they had was just of the divers that were like dissecting the isopods and like showing the parasite in them and everything. Like, like big budget movies would use CGI and it wouldn't look as good.
Yeah.
They had this isopod on there, and it was like, it was that's probably one of the grossest scenes. Like you see people with like, welts all over their body and like people like getting torn apart or whatever. But like just him like dissecting this creature on this boat, and for one, you're like, he's wearing like like latex gloves, and you're like, dude, just throw that thing back in the water. Like, what are you doing? It's like still alive, and it's just this huge creature. And like I've seen isopods before, just on the internet or whatever it is, and like they're not a pretty sight. They're not kind of in the eyes at all. And he just like not playing with it, but dissecting it and taking these parasites out and just like literally having them in his hand. It was probably one of the craziest scenes of the movie as well.
And I wouldn't even be surprised. I doubt this is the case, but it's almost like if you had told me, yeah, this is an actual infected fish with this parasite in it, and they just used it in the movie. Like I would believe it almost. Like that's how real it looked. So, I mean, if someone told me that, I wouldn't be surprised. But obviously, the scenes that I'm more so referencing is like the fully grown isopods, coming out of the people's necks or running out of their stomachs. There's obvious CGI there, and it didn't always look the best. But for the most part, the practical stuff, I agree, was pretty great. Those two divers, that storyline did bug me a little bit because I understand their role in the movie is like, oh, these are the experts that were warning the government before it happened, and that's all fine and dandy. But it's like, they're the typical, in a movie, there's always like the typical people who are aware of what's going on, but they just don't really seem to like care about the consequences, or like, you're clearly gonna die. The dissecting the fish was one thing, right? Like, he's dissecting the fish, he's doing his job, but it's like once they start realizing like they knew like these things are mutated, like this is gonna kill people, and then they go diving in the water at night. Like it's just like okay, I know you're doing your job, but there has to be a line where you're like, we have to stop doing this. We will die, and I didn't really feel that from them. So it was kind of, I felt a little unrealistic in that respect. And just to touch on it real quick, what we were talking about before, because it came to mind, so I didn't want to forget, about the whole pain thing, and how they got that to come across. It's a very unbelievable thing, or a very crazy thing to think about. If you're in so much pain that you would literally rather die, you know what I mean? Like for a policeman to walk in the house and someone to be like, shoot me and kill me, so I'm no longer in this pain. It would be easy to put that in a movie and for it to be not believable. For it to be put in a movie and be like, okay, you're being a little ridiculous here. But the fact that the film was able to get to build to that point to where you did believe it, because building up to that point, you saw people throwing up all over the street. You saw people in the hospital in immense pain, and all of these things, the surgeries going on, to where you got to the point where you believed that someone just in their house somewhere that doesn't know why this is happening, and all of a sudden it's happening to them, they would be in that amount of pain. So I did appreciate that and think that was done really well. Also, this is the last thing I'll say, and then if there's anything else you want to bring up, you can. The food eating contest, where they're eating the seafood, And like we're already aware. I think the first time they show it, we're not aware yet of what's going on or that anything's wrong. But they go back to it once everyone starts throwing up, and you know that there's something wrong with the food at that. I don't know if you know at that point that it's a full on like parasite, but you know something's wrong with the food, dude. I was grossed out so bad. I was like, I'm never eating seafood again in my life. Like, I'm already not a big seafood guy, but seeing that, like, just imagine going to a eating contest. I think they were eating crab or something, and then all of that food being contaminated, and you start throwing it up. Like, that was a moment for me where I was like, man, this is rough.
Yeah, no, and I could be wrong, but it could just be from like my memory of it just being gross. But I don't even think it was like crab or anything. I think it was like crawfish or something like those like shrimp that you
Oh, okay.
like suck out and stuff, and like
Yeah.
you just and they're just like it's a fooding contest, and it's not like something in like a show or movie where they're just like eating a bunch of hot dogs. They're getting gross with it and everything. And so it just looks gross, and then they start getting sick and throwing up, and it's just like terrible. Like if I was just even in like the back row just watching this eating contest, I'd be like, "Oh God,
I'd be throwing up,
this
dude.
is so disgusting."
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's bad. I'm not like when it comes to throwing up and stuff. I'm not like, oh, I'm gonna throw up because I saw it. I'm not that bad. But that scene got me a little bit nauseous for sure. But okay, yeah, I think that's gonna do it for the Bay. Next week we're going to finish the month with End of Watch, Jake Gyllenhaal film. And very excited about that one. So we'll talk about that one next week. If you haven't seen it, check it out before next week so that you can listen or watch to the entire podcast before we do it. And every month after we finish our final film for the theme, we also rank all 4 movies that we talked about this month. So that'll be a next week episode as well.
all right. And if you want to follow us on any social media and stay updated with the podcasts, or just support us, you can follow me at Devon Smile on Twitter or Day.Von on TikTok. What about you?
All right, for me, it'll be Josh Movie Guy on TikTok. If you're listening to this podcast, you can watch the video version on YouTube at the Watch More Movies podcast YouTube channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast as well. Wherever you're watching or listening, we would appreciate if you subscribed, gave us a review, or gave us a like on the video. It does really help. And we hope we've inspired you to watch more movies.